All right, well, welcome to another Project PHaEDRA office hour. We do this every month on Tuesdays at 2 p.m. We had been doing it the first Tuesday of the month, but this summer we'll be doing it the last Tuesday of each month. And today we have an exciting one. This is going to be a live tour of the plate stacks where they hold all of the astronomical glass plates that they've been taking here since the 1800s. And I'm Nico Carver. I'm one of the librarians that works on Project PHaEDRA, and I'll let Katie and Sydney introduce themselves.
Hi everyone, I'm Katie Fry. I'm also one of the librarians here at the Center for Astrophysics, and I've been involved with a lot of the kind of logistics and back end of Project PHaEDRA.
Hi, I'm Sydney. I'm the Assistant Community Coordinator for Project PHaEDRA. So I do a lot of community outreach, and I work with Katie and Nico on things like this. So, yeah.
And the way we're going to do this first part of the tour is if you have any questions, just type them into the chat. And if they're urgent, Katie will say them verbally so that we catch them. If they're not urgent, then we can get to them at the end. Can everyone hear me okay? Good.
Yes.
All right, I'm going to switch my camera around. And so you're going to be seeing what I'm seeing here. All right. And so up on screen, Katie should have put up a historical picture of this door in building C. Maybe doing it now. There we go.
Yes.
Okay. And so you can see, we should have figured out who all these people are, but I know there's a lot of familiar faces there.
Well, this is Annie Jump Cannon right here. I don't know if you can see my mouse, but
yep, yeah. I can.
And this looks like Cecilia Payne.
That does look like Cecilia.
Yeah. I do have the list, but it's just not up on the screen.
That's fine. we can share later, yeah, who everyone is there. But we wanted to show you this just to show you that we still work at the actual observatory building here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, that all of the Harvard computers did. And so this is a live video now of that same door in building C. And now I want to introduce you to Sarah Lavallee. This is the acting curator of the Astronomical glass plate collection. And she's going to be taking us on this tour.
Thank you, Nico. So we are starting at this doorway because in 1844, we moved to this current location. But as you will very soon see, we had to continually expand as the collection grew. So we'll walk inside. The original stacks could accommodate 105,000 glass plates. Our current collection, though, is 550,000. So this necessitated a much larger space to accommodate, not only just the number of plates, but the sheer weight of them. But in this portion of the building upstairs, we have offices. I wrote down everyone's names, where Annie Jump Cannon, Antonia Murray, Carlos Shapley, and Celia Payne worked upstairs. So much of the original space has been kind of parsed out and reused. But this, where we're walking through now, is D building, and this is where the plate stacks are currently housed. You'll notice this fire door that will drop down. So the new building is all brick because fire was a very real concern that destroyed many collections prior to this ours. But that was something that they were continually worried about. So this is the plate stacks. Kind of start over here. We have a lot of the history of the astrophotography and astronomy at Harvard is housed within this collection. So it starts in 1885, but we have some plates that are earlier due to experimentation, and it ends in 1992. As you can see, some of our earlier research notebooks that you have been working so hard and going through. So this shows a drawing of Jupiter. Part of why these are beautiful to look at, but not necessarily scientifically accurate, is because it really varied depending on the artistic skill of who is viewing it, or even just your perception of what you are seeing. So once we have the Great Refractor, which is like the 1830s, 1840s, this is made for visual optics. So photograph. At Harvard, they were experimenting with daguerreotypes and wet plates using this. So we have like John Whipple took daguerreotype of the moon. We have George Bond, who took the first successful daguerreotype of Jupiter. That was in 1849 and 1850. But the real like transition in astrophotography occurs when we start getting initially wet plates, but those were only light sensitive so long as the emulsion was wet. When we get these gelatin dried plates, that's how we're able to get these really like nice deep field images. And those are how you can see the very faint stars. So the wet plates were developed around 1851 and were in use in Harvard by 1857. We have about 200 of these in our collection, but they tend to be a very poor quality because it was very trial and error with how they were putting together the chemicals and even developing them. So most of our collection are what you can see here, and these are the gelatin plates. And these were initially developed around the 1870s, 1890s. And this is why we have a much longer exposure. That's why they're much more detailed, and they just in general are better preserved at this point. These three plates that you are looking at are all showing like examples of the small Magellanic Cloud. And the ink markings on this third were made by either Henrietta Leavitt or one of her assistants. So what you can see on like this is a negative where they are marking. It can be very difficult for us to determine who is marking specific plates because a lot of these women computers did have assistants that they would work alongside, and they didn't always like initial their own work. So it was a very collaborative effort. This darker image is what we call a positive plate. So Henrietta Leavitt, her work technique would be what she referred to as superposition to find these variable stars. So she would place the emulsions of a negative, which is, as you can see here, on top, like facing this positive plate. And this would be like a standard for this type of comparison. And then she would look for a halo from the long exposure positive images surrounding the compact negative images in the foreground. If these halos were disproportionately large or small relative to surrounding stars, she was able to suspect stellar variability. And by using this method, Leavitt discovered 1,777 variable stars. So you're gonna move on?
Sure.
These plates are from Arequipa, Peru. So we have a little diorama. This is a really unique aspect of our collection at Harvard because most are only like the northern or southern hemisphere. The fact that we have a catalog of the entire sky is really unique and is a great, I guess, asset for our collection. There are some like problematic elements with how they had treated the local people with land rights and just general attitudes towards them as employees. We are definitely, I think, going to be unpacking a lot more of that now with our research. But this, I guess, more complete record of the night sky not only allowed like Henrietta Leavitt's groundbreaking research, but it also allowed like Adelaide Ames with Harlow Shapley to classify different suspected galaxies when they were working. They did not know that we had more than one. So the ability to see, here's an example on the plate of like some of these like work that they were doing for like galaxy counting, and even just discovering that they weren't evenly distributed in the night sky comes out of this record that they were able to make with these foreign and domestic observatories.
And were you going to talk about the shipping boxes? Or?
Yeah, we have many of these boxes from all sorts of different decades, but this would be how they could transport or ship these plates to us. So it always is shocking to me that they stayed in as relatively intact condition as we have them, but they would be sent on ships predominantly or by train. We did lose some during World War II. There's a ship that was sunk by a U-boat, but in general, like they were a very common practice, and we have some even up till I think Martha Hazen, so the curator before Lindsay and Allison. So relatively recent, we were still getting some of these shipped back in wooden crates. So these are some of the early tools that the women computers would have used. This is a light lectern. So this was like a precursor to the light tables that I'm using to illuminate the plates today. We have images, and I'm sure you've seen them, of a Yanny jump cannon sitting next to a window examining plates using this. So the sunlight would reflect onto the mirror and then light the plate from behind. This is an example of just some of the various loops or magnifying glasses and eyepieces that would be used when examining these plates. This, yeah, definitely hold one up. These images are very small, so I think anything to just really draw out the details, because especially in these like spectra plates, they were looking for like these very, what I think are minute changes in these lines to determine very important data about like what the, I guess, composition of stars would be, and all sorts of incredible discoveries. So, and another kind of fun tool that they have are what we call fly spankers. So this is an example of some of the like nicer ones and the specific style that they were making at the time. So you can see these like various like dots, and then they have the corresponding like numbers with them.
Just hold one up to the light.
Oh yeah, there you go. So this was used as like a standard for measuring the brightness of a star. So these fragments of plates were cut from larger glass plates. So we have an example of one plate where we think that that's likely what they were doing. And so this would be done after they have exposed a single star multiple times. So multiple exposure plate is what they would call that now. So that was a technique for having just a control for comparing these stars.
And you were showing me the other day that originally they did them like this, the fly spanker with the handle, but then eventually they just would cut out the pieces and tape them to the plate, right?
Yeah, we have what we thought were about 13 of these like with the metal frame, but we have found several hundred pieces that have these like either pieces of tape on the back, or were just in boxes, like presumably either to be used or ones that could have been if they needed them later. So we'll have a lot more work to do into when and why these like techniques evolved, but I think it'd be a very interesting study. This spectra plate here, I38727, is one that was used by Annie Jump Cannon. So this is another example of where either these markings were by her or an assistant. But Cannon's practice is how we were able to associate this with her. So she would number every spectra and then use a loop to call out the corresponding letter classification, which her assistant would then record in the notebooks. The system was why she was so efficient in this work. She was able to classify 350,000 spectra, and many of these were the volumes of the Henry Draper catalog. And this plate next to it was created in Arequipa and used by Cecilia Panga-Poshkin in the 1920s for her research on the chemical composition of stellar atmospheres. So this was part of her discovery that stars are made of 1 million times more hydrogen than Earth. So these were numbers that you very possibly came across, these plate numbers, while you were helping to catalog your digitized notebooks. And then these are just two plates I find especially beautiful. This is a positive of the Milky Way, and you can see like that streak across the top is a comet. And then next to it is another example of a galaxy count plate.
For anyone that doesn't recognize this part of the Milky Way, this is in the southern hemisphere, so we never see this part of the Milky Way up here in the north.
And so as you can see, every single one of these cabinets, I opened up some examples, are full of these glass plates. Most of them are 8 by 10. We have some that are as large as 14 by 16, and then some that are smaller than 3 by 5. We'll walk through so you can kind of get a sense of the space. Sorry, I just have to try.
Sure. Do you want me to go first?
Sure. So these are some of our A plates. These are the 14 by 16 and really considered like the jewel of our collection. It's a very unusual size because of just how large it is. But these are beautiful images. We get a lot of detail on these plates.
And could you talk about the storage, about why they're stored vertically? And
Yeah, it really helps because if you can imagine like every single one of these plates, and if they were mended, which is what we call it, it's really just binding though a broken plate to like a stable glass surface, it then doubles in weight and they are extremely heavy. So this is a good way of just minimizing the weight and pressure on each of them because you really can't stack them that high, or you do risk like just having them crack throughout. We also have, you can see where they have like keeping the plates evenly propped up in like a V shape. It's to prevent them from falling over. So all of these cabinets were built. We have like you can see the metal dividers, but it limits the number of plates that are in one place at a time. And then also any of them being able to fall down side to side. So you don't want that because obviously it could lead to cracking, breaking, even just chipping.
And are these the original envelopes, or are they?
Some of them,
okay.
We try to avoid like rejacketing them. Some of them we do have to, because when you take them out, the plate out of a jacket, we press the sides of it is our technique and then slide it up, which means that the edges tend to wear out very quickly.
Oh, okay.
We do have several jackets that we boxes of them where we have rejacketed with the new and then just kept the old ones for preservation. And even when you're holding them to carry, you keep them at this angle. So if this was an 8x10 plate, and like hold it in the webbing of your hands to just prevent scratching from the emulsion, because that's really why even taking plates out, you're bowing the front of that jacket to prevent sliding repeatedly on the surface. So all of the markings, all the calculations that these women were doing, that's always on the glass side. The only thing that's written on the emulsion is the original plate number.
Okay.
And then along the sides of the jackets, if you see all those tiny red dots, that's our system for tracking. At the top, that means that they were scanned. If it's the red lines at the bottom, that's the plate that was broken and then later mended.
Show.
Sure.
Okay.
So these jackets always have like the basic location information. So some of the plate series, like this is a B plate, those are just chronological, but it'll still have like the class, the right ascension, declination. Some of them have a quality, not all of the jackets, and then date, exposure time, and then occasionally they'll write down like the viewing condition. So if it was cloudy, if there was a filter used, like that type of information could also be included. It's also duplicated in our log books though. So every single plate has a corresponding logbook entry. The other system we use is what they call the patrol plates. And those are filed by their right ascension and declination and then separated by their series. Here's more of our boxes that we have kept just from various either activities. So they would go and like look for expeditions for comets or eclipses. Some of these were even just for storage or sent back to us. These are some of the early tools. Do not have nearly as much information on them, but these are some of the many projects I think we would like to take on would be researching more about just the technology that we have that accompanies these plates. So up until I think very recently, we were considered like a working archive. So even though they stopped producing the plates, we still had people who were coming in to use them as a tool, because that's what they really are. It's an astronomical tool. So I think it's a kind of shift in this mentality that even some of the older faculty are experiencing, but now treating this collection as like a historical document of this era and the work that these women were doing. Very careful on the spiral stairs. Another floor, and all of these cabinets again are filled with our glass plates.
Sarah, there was a quick question.
Yes.
That last tool that you showed us upstairs, was that like a microscope? It looked like there was like two eyepieces.
I think it's a comparator.
Yeah, I think it's a blink comparator where you're comparing two plates. It's the same kind of tool that was used to find Pluto by who was that? Claude. I can't remember the name right now, but yeah, I think it's a blink comparator.
That's what I think it is. I think it's just not a complete set of it. This is the space that we were doing the DASH project. So that was the digitization of this collection. We got to, I think, about 415,000 of our plates, and it was just the direct image, not the spectra plates that were part of this project. So the first step, we had like the barcoding and then checking condition of each of the plates and documenting if they had handwriting or any of the women or other astronomers associated with them, general condition. So once they went through all of that, they would then be sent down here to be photographed. So this was where we would photograph the plate. This is just a light table. So we would lay the emulsion face down and then the writing would be face up. So we could get a nice photograph. Yeah, we can take these off. Of any historical markings that may have been there. Not all of our plates have marks, because even the women computers themselves, they would erase markings. Just to do other research. So we do have several jackets that say, like, please make a copy before erasing, because these were just a shared communal tool that people were using. And then for this side, we would take a photograph of the original jackets. So this is in case we do have like either a jacket wears out. We had a flood in 2016 that damaged 60,000 plates. So most of them, I think, were able to be saved in some capacity. We had no flood or no mold growth that resulted from that, which was incredible. But I think having this type of a digitization is really great in case something like that ever happens again. We definitely hope not, but you never know. And then after being photographed, they would have to be cleaned. So this was the next step. So that could be markings, but even just the dust, we didn't want anything that could look like it. So excess emulsion, anything that would look like it could be a star or something of interest that was not actually on the plate and being photographed, we would want removed at this station. And then the plate would be sent into the scanning room. So this is our scanner. All of the equipment and especially the software was custom built and designed for this project. So it's very incredible. We're able to get high quality images, but then also like it'll generate like photometry for these scans of our plates. So this table is what actually moves, uses air pressure, and the camera itself stays stationary, or we don't have a blurry image, but it takes several images per plate, and then everything is stitched together again to make this mosaic of it. We can digitize, like right now it's set up to do one of those large A plates, like a 14 by 16. When we had the 8 by 10 plates, we could do 2 at a time, and it takes about a minute per scan. So we were able to very rapidly go through many, many plates. The whole like startup procedure takes about an hour because we have to do a lot of calibrations, but I think it gives a good baseline for ensuring that we have accurate data when we start up, but then also what we're checking is to make sure this opal glass, so that white glass you're seeing, it's to make sure that we don't have any gouges or scratches that aren't accounted for as we do these scans.
So is this the light source and it goes underneath there, or
nope,
what? Or
this drawer pulls out, and so that was nice. It would kind of backlight this door. We get a little bit of light for us, because normally when we're scanning, all of these lights are turned off. And so we would put the glass side down and the emulsion face up as it would go back in, and then this light would come and turn off.
Okay.
So the only thing that's lighting up is like the camera as it's flashing.
And is Dash the only project you know of that has built something like this to do photometry with glass plates?
Yeah, I know of. I know other observatories are, I think, starting the process of either just digitizing their collections or wanting to develop this type of equipment, but it is very expensive and time consuming. So I think those are limitations, because we are the largest collection of astronomical glass plates in the world. So it's, I think, much easier to justify 500,000 plates versus a few thousand or a few hundred plates. So I think hopefully, ideally, other collections will be able to digitize, but I think without having everything, I guess, would have some distortion. Like we have just accounted for ours and like built it to identify that even from the telescope along the edges of every plate, there's going to be this distortion. But other places that have like spoken about their process are taking several months because they're having to use a flatbed scanner and rotate repeatedly, and then manipulate these images to try and come up with like the truest I guess, visual record of what they're seeing. So they're editing these images together and then having to, I guess, determine how much editing they are doing and whether or not that's then causing more distortion or if it's giving just a clearer image of the plate that you're seeing. So I think it takes out some of this guesswork that other observatories have said that they are doing with their like art flatbed scanners. I guess is what most of them have.
Oh, so you're saying that each telescope has been profiled in some way and then that's built into the optics?
Katie talked to all of this back end things, but
Okay.
they were, I think, trusting everything that they were getting from these scans. So I don't know
Okay, interesting.
what all Ed was running through and doing with this, our former engineer. So I know they had quite a complex pipeline, but it was supposed to be able to generate light curves and give a very true image of what you were seeing.
Cool.
Yeah. You can have a seat here.
Sure. Oh, thanks. Okay, that's the end of the tour. Bear with me for a second while I set this up here. Okay, so I think we're now ready for question and answer time.
Yeah, if anyone has questions, feel free to speak up or raise your hand. I did have a question that came up from me though. So I guess I'll start with that. You mentioned about the fly spankers, you know, they would cut the glass and they'd have all these, they'd have different stars of different brightnesses. You know, I guess I have two questions. So how did they get, you know, all the different brightnesses in a nice line like that?
Sure, I know this just with their multiple exposures. So we'll have plates where you can see on the jackets, and it'll be like very short exposures, but in very rapid succession. So I don't know if this was in like a development process, but
I think I've heard also they could just cover the telescope, right?
Yeah.
So they could just have like a black sheet or something they put over the telescope and then move it slightly and take that back off and let it expose again.
Yeah, so that's how they're doing like these multiple exposures, but like the fact that like it's so precise in the line and like the different brightnesses. So yeah, it's, I think because they have this ability to keep the plates sitting there for so long, you can then wait until this like change will be occurring. So like a lot of them, it'll be like a few seconds on each exposure time. That doesn't mean that they were only sitting there. They could be there all night with these.
Interesting. And then the other question I had was about you've mentioned this a couple times to me too, and I've never asked, but like making a copy of a plate. You said that, you know, they'd have a marking on there saying to make a copy of a plate. Do you know how they would do that?
I don't know their exact process. I think that would be great, but we have a lot of these, and we might even have some down here. It is like a paper copy that we have. So okay. I'm gonna imagine like an early copy mission type thing. But I can go off camera real fast, but like we have some really great examples where they were.
And maybe like a contact print.
Maybe. Yeah. I do. You said that a few times, like on various tours that I've been a part of, and I'm always like, what is up with that? I've always been curious. I'm like, I should ask. So that would be considered a copy for, okay. But did they not copy their markings in that case, or were they able to do that too?
We have, I think, several of like these types of like really large scale, and like on this one you can see there are this one does have markings on it. They could also, they'll just have like, I've seen graph paper where they have just marked down notations and like drawn out kind of grids and showing patterns. So I think
Okay.
just some way of recognizing, but
Well, and probably some people have seen in the notebook, sometimes there's little cutouts that seem to be actual photo prints of the plates.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
so I'm going to guess that they had just some.
A dark room kind
Yeah.
of ability.
We
yeah.
did have a dark room here for developing plates, so it makes sense that they also had like photographs.
Oh, that's really cool. Thanks. That makes a lot of sense. Yeah, I forgot about the cutouts. They obviously are able to take photos, paper photos from the plate negatives. That makes a lot of sense. So
And if you want to talk, Katie, you would know probably way more about like the back end of what the dash pipeline can entail of how it is compensating for distortions, because I know there's always distortions, but I
Yeah.
know, I think they did try and at least make a standard for that.
yeah, I don't know too much, but I will say that I do know that they kind of break the plate into bins or sections. And the sections are not in a grid, they're actually concentric. So there's a center, and then the next bin is like a ring around that, and then a ring around that, and there's like 9 bins typically for a plate. So the inner bins, these circles and the rings in the center are better and more accurate, because when you get towards the edges, then you get that's when you get the aberration and the distortions.
That's also where we tend to see the most emulsion damage too. Like if there's going to be some, like a lot of the chipping and flaking will come along on those edges.
Yeah.
It's like a 20-year project, so.
Yeah, but I don't know how they calculate the size of each of these rings. But it must have to do with the plate size, obviously, and then probably maybe something about the telescope as well, like the apertures and things like that. So
Yeah, every time we do a new plate series, they would have the engineers would do recalibration, even just so the camera knew where the drawer should be going, because all of that is automated once it's set up. It's just way more technical than I can speak to.
Well, does anyone else have any questions? Oh,
Yeah. How do you guys clean the plates?
We use a water and ethanol mixture, so it's 40% ethanol, 60% water, and just a tiny like drizzle on the glass side, and then just a razor like you use if you're like cleaning paint off of a window, and just gently kind of just scrape around the edges and then dry it. We have little hand dryers.
What about the emulsion side? If some dust gets on the emulsion side, you just have to blow it off, or what?
Just, yeah, really gentle. So we have compressed air. We don't use that on the emulsion side. It's just these little hand pumps that Weissman Preservation Center helped with, and able determining the levels of the ethanol water mixture. So it was effective, but the lowest risk possible, but then also the types of dryers that we use.
Cool, thanks.
I'd love to ask you about this. I recently heard that there was going to be a named like collection of some of the plates that have markings in honor of Wilhelmina Fleming, and I'd love to hear you talk about that. I know this. I think this is a new effort, or maybe I'm mistaken, but I'd love to learn more about that and the plates that were collected for that are of the markings. If you
Yeah, the former curator, Lindsay Smith's role, like set aside some plates that are just the really beautiful examples of the different types of research that people were using these plates for, or if they have these incredible images on them. It's like the Horsehead Nebula Discovery Plate is part of this collection. And so it's named in honor of Wilhelmina Fleming, the first curator of this collection, but also like she was one of these women computers, is how she was referred to at the time. But she was really training these other women and like how to identify like objects on these plates and like the work process, and then even the classification system that Annie Jump Cannon is really credited with making. I've seen like Wilhelmina Fleming had her own kind of early iterations of these, so she's very prolific in like the astronomy that was being conducted at the Harvard College Observatory. And so it's a little over 600 glass plates that are part of this new collection. And they're receiving just like special preservation immediately. We have so many plates, it can be very difficult to prioritize them. So that's in terms of like the glass that's being used to mend them and making high quality images that don't erase the markings. So even just some of the light sources could make them not as visible. So they're going to be getting like this treatment so we can just better preserve them. These are also the plates that are most commonly requested by researchers. So it's, I think, a really great example though of both the discoveries, work patterns, and like all of the different women and their interactions with each other. So the jackets a lot of times will have like notes back and forth between them. I think that's a very rare opportunity that we have to like see how they're interacting and communicating amongst each other as part of the scientific discovery.
That's great. Do you have any plans to exhibit that or a portion of that collection at all at Harvard?
I think we have lots of plans of things that we would love to do. So obviously, like if we can make replicas of these, but I think a project that like Tom Burns is one of the curatorial assistants here has really been working on is to help us like find companies that could make like tactile representations of these plates so we could have more viewers and more people who might have like low vision or no vision still experience like some of this work and the discoveries. I think even if we can get these like images though, like a really high quality image, it would be nice to have those like online to display to just allow more people to access like, this collection, because that's also safer for it instead of repeatedly pulling them out of their jackets and carrying them from like B237s, our cold storage vault, back to the plate stacks. So I think between like taking over hallway space around here, but then the potential if we can get some of these tactile images or replicas for sharing those more widely, I think there's a lot of opportunity for us to explore like how we can get the collection out.
Thank you.
Good. Anyone else have any questions or anything they'd like to share about what they saw?
If anyone's willing, I think I would love to hear like reactions to like the plates after like working through all the notebooks. So
Yeah.
that would be interesting.
It was nice seeing the behind the scenes in the scanner and all that, other than looking at pictures on your website. So thank you for the effort.
Welcome. We do have a virtual tour online as well if you wanted to go through like each of the floors. And Lindsay Smith's role put together like little displays around on all of our window ledges that show different aspects of like the women who worked here, our tools, the technology. So I'd highly recommend going through that as well. And it goes into more detail on the plate series, the jackets, the flood, and then of course the scanner and dash.
So I'm sorry, I probably skipped the beginning of the conversation, but you're actually using the camera behind you for making the scans. So you're not using regular scanner, or both scanner and the camera?
This is what we refer to as our scanner. So, and Katie jumped in, but it's an LCD camera.
Got it.
CCD camera.
Oh yeah, CCD, sorry.
CCD, yeah.
Yeah. And so it's, I think, just a much higher quality and higher resolution image
Got it.
that we're creating versus like when we take the photographs, like we can do a TIFF or like a raw file, but this is, I think, a much more detailed of what it is creating, just even in terms of like the amount of data that is being pulled from each plate as it's transferred is much greater.
Yeah, it's very high resolution. So for instance, those Nikon cameras, the width of the picture is maybe 5,000 pixels. This is like 25,000 pixels. So you can really go in on the stars.
And for each 8x10 plate, the way of quantifying it that the former curator would use was that it would fill a DVD with all of the information that was taken from it versus like the same photograph of that plate you could easily just download.
Great, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, and then I know what you said LCD, because isn't the table was actually designed to help build and test LCD TVs, and it's been repurposed here. And so the plate sits on the table and it moves around, staying very, level, but it moves around, and then the camera stays stationary and takes photos of these different sections as the plate moves around. So, I mean, we do call it a scanner, but like, as you're all saying, it's like, it's a very, very high quality camera.
And I don't know if it's also like then like to like process that it goes through, like where we have these like engineers who are working to then like take the data, and then that's where it would be like sent for all this photometry. So I think that's our way, at least internally, of differentiating as well between like the photographs, which were like for like historical documentation, versus like these photographs using this like very large machine, which were more for like the scientific work that was being done.
Yeah, the images go through a software pipeline to extract like the brightness levels of each individual star, and then store that into light, so you can get light curve information.
I'm just trying to imagine what people will be doing in 100 years, trying to work with the records from this year. Will they be going through the similar effort, or probably not? Are you aware how transferable the data we're collecting right now for, as we're going through transitions from DVD to using flash memory, then going to the cloud? Are we safe here? Or are we looking at the, establishing the same project in 22nd century or something?
Well, I guess I can say that the images are stored in FITS files, which is a very common and standardized format for astronomy data. So there's a lot of information in like the text header of these FITS images, and the images themselves are in that format. And then kind of for the longevity of them, the images are currently stored at the Harvard Research Computing Center. And we have a couple copies of them. And we also have magnetic tape backups, which, those sound kind of old school, but those are still, some of the best technology for long-term storage of backups. So we have at least 2 sets of magnetic tape storage backups, and we're going to be looking at, upgrading and transferring them to newer magnetic tapes in the next few years, as they need to be refreshed every 10, 15 years or so. We definitely care about the long-term and longevity of the data and the raw files, as well as the kind of derived data.
Right, got it. Okay, thank you. Thank you for your question, for answering my question. Thanks.
I think that's a really great question though, because I feel like that's what this entire collection is though. Like the glass plates in themselves are a continuation, or like showing a progression of technology. The scanning, I think, is just the next step in that, for like these high quality images that we are taking. So I don't even know if I can imagine what this like next frontier would be and what people can use these glass plates or this data for, but I think it'll be very incredible and exciting, because I can't imagine that like this is the end point for it.
And then just to add on one more thing, I think the glass plates are a very stable format in a way for long-term storage of this data, because I mean, what you're talking about with like the constant change of digital data, that is sort of harder to deal with in a way than the glass plates, which can just be here in these jackets. So, so I think that it's really important that we keep the glass plates around. There's been periods where people said, let's just throw them out if we have the data already, but they're the original material.
And as long as we keep them as stable as possible, that's why like some of this initial preservation work we're trying to do is because this building is from the 1930s, so the central air conditioning or humidity control isn't necessarily where we would want it now for like archival standards. But the rate at which this glass would start to degrade is much slower than some of our technology becoming obsolete, which we have encountered even with just like this project going on for 20 years. So.
Just to briefly connect with what you're saying about, this glass plate collection kind of exemplifying the changes in technology and astronomy. I mean, probably most people here on Zoom, but maybe Zoom no, but maybe some don't, that, you know, CCD photometry is how modern astronomy is done. They use CCD cameras. And so it's like we're using this modern astronomical instrument that we use to take photos of the stars and taking photos of glass plates, which are photos of stars. So it's kind of a interesting transition. But yeah, for those of you who've been doing, you know, the transcription and working on star notes, you know, you've been looking a lot at these, at the notebooks. So yeah, as Sarah mentioned earlier, like if you have any other perspectives now that you've seen some of the plates and seen kind of the types of equipment that the women computers would have used in writing out these notebooks. Interesting to hear your perspectives.
If not, that's also okay because we're going to do a celebration in July of the plate numbers being done. But I had a question. So on the galaxy count plates, how are they counting galaxies? Is each one of those a galaxy that they've marked?
Some of them you can see like really tiny. It'll be that like beautiful like spiral shape. And so like the different color ink could also like would be used. So if they knew like this is a galaxy, like or suspected galaxies, they could assign those different colors. But a lot of times if you just use like the magnifier, you can see what we now know is this like very like distinctive shape that some galaxies have. Which is why it's very fun to show like we have these two plates. So one has the markings and one does not. Because me looking at it, what I see on the unmarked plate is like maybe 5 or 6 that I would say like that's the galaxy for sure. But then when you see it all marked up, I think it really like reiterates like, what these women were doing and like level of detail that they had to be looking for and the precision and being able to differentiate between like what they were seeing on these plates. Because we still have like jackets that misidentify things as nebula, where we now know that they're a galaxy. So this wasn't just an immediate like change, like this was a very radical like shift. So I think those are fun to come across, to like see that like transition of knowledge. But we do have like kind of categorizing or like of knowledge, I guess, that was occurring at that point. But it does show where they were assuming that things were nebulas at the time that we now know weren't, or were postulating that something could be of significance, even if they weren't quite sure of why at the moment. Like, I'm always just in awe though of what they could determine and discover. Like it's so far beyond my capacities. So incredible work.
Thank you.
So as Sydney was saying, next month we're going to be celebrating the end of the plate numbers project on Zooniverse. It might not be quite done, but it will be very close. And then we're going to transition Zooniverse to finding non-textual things within the, so sketches, like we saw the sketch of Jupiter at the start of the tour, things like that we're going to be looking for in the notebooks. And then in August, Erica Blumenfeld will be speaking. Erica, are you still on the call?
Yes, I am.
Do you want to say a few words about August?
Sure. Well, I'll be, yeah, I'm really excited actually. I'll be launching the project I've been working on since 2019, working on a print edition that focuses and centers on the women's markings. And I've been working on this project with Island Press that's out of the University of Washington. And yeah, I'll have an exciting announcement for them too. So I'll save that for then. Thank you. Really looking forward to it. Yeah, I can't wait to share. I shared the in progress last year, I guess it was. And so I'm excited to share the final result. Thank you.
Great. We're looking forward to it too.
Yeah.
All right. Well, if there are not any other comments or questions, I guess we can call this one a wrap. And thanks everyone for coming.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.